The smell of burnt coffee hung in the kitchen when I found my daughter's message telling me not to come for Christmas. Still, I set the mug down gently, watching the steam curl like a lie drifting upward. As the bitter scent thickened, my heartbeat slowed instead of rising. While it lingered, I realized it wasn't the coffee that had burned, it was my trust. The same aroma reminded me, who had been rewriting her words all year. That's when I decided, some betrayals deserve a quiet justice of their own. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Snow drifted against the windows of Walter Reed's quiet Midwestern home, the kind of gentle December snowfall that usually made the house feel warmer, fuller, alive with memory. Tonight, though, the silence felt heavier. Walter moved slowly through the living room, taking out the same red plastic storage bins he'd opened every Christmas for more than 3 decades. His late wife, June, had labeled every lid in her signature looping handwriting: ornaments, lights, Emily's box. That last one he always opened last, almost ceremonially, as if the handwriting itself carried a heartbeat. He pried it open and lifted out the ornaments Emily had made at 5 years old: uneven clay stars, glittered popsicle stick trees. The crooked felt angel she once insisted looked exactly like Mom. He dusted them gently and hung each one on the tree, pausing every now and then to picture her face the Christmas she'd placed them there for the first time. Back then, she would run circles around the coffee table, giggling, while he and June pretended not to notice her sneaking extra candy canes. Just as he reached for the last ornament, his phone buzzed on the counter. He wiped his hands on his sweater and walked over, expecting it to be a simple "on my way" or "do you need anything for Christmas Eve dinner?" Instead, the screen showed a message so blunt, so oddly cold, that for a second he wondered if it had been sent to the wrong number. "Don't come for Christmas, Dad. Jason thinks you're embarrassing." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Walter read the sentence again, then again, and a third time his eyes caught on the final word, embarrassing, as if it had been carved into the screen with a knife. He whispered the word aloud, tasting disbelief. Emily had never spoken to him that way, not even during her rebellious teenage years. She'd never been cruel, never distant. And embarrassing. What had he done? He stared at the glowing screen until the letters blurred, a quiet ache tightening beneath his ribs. He typed back slowly, carefully, as if choosing the wrong word might make everything worse. "Sweetheart, is everything okay? This doesn't sound like you." He set the phone down, expecting at least a warm explanation, a reassurance, something. Instead, after a long minute, it buzzed again. "Please respect our boundaries." Just that, no warmth, no softness. The kind of message a therapist might script for a patient cutting off a toxic parent. Except he wasn't toxic. He wasn't intrusive. He was the man who paid her mortgage every month so she and Jason could live without drowning in debt. He was the man who showed up for every recital, every graduation, every broken heart she'd nursed through her 20s. But the message was final, chilling in its distance. Walter sank slowly into the wooden chair at the kitchen table, the same one where Emily used to sit swinging her legs, asking him to cut her pancakes into tiny squares like Mommy does. Now he sat alone, the faint ticking of the wall clock the only sound in the room. It struck him that the house didn't just feel empty tonight. It felt like something sacred had been abruptly severed. He rubbed his forehead with both hands, trying to piece together what could have happened. Had he said something wrong the last time they spoke? Had Jason complained about him again, his age, his old-fashioned habits, his quiet way of showing affection? Jason's voice echoed in his memory. "Your dad means well, Em, but he's old school, and honestly, kinda awkward." Jason always joked, but with an edge that never felt like humor. Walter's gaze drifted toward the small envelope on the counter, the bank confirmation letter he'd opened just yesterday. Mortgage payment received. He always sent it early so Emily never worried. She didn't even know the true number. He'd reduced it, quietly covering the difference without ever calling it charity. Fathers didn't call love charity. He thought of that moment yesterday. How good it felt to know he was still helping her, still protecting her, even if from a distance. Now she was telling him not to come for Christmas, because he was, what? An embarrassment. He exhaled, long and shaky. The lights on the Christmas tree flickered softly against the wall, casting shadows that moved like ghosts of old Decembers. He wished Ed June were here. She always understood Emily in ways he couldn't. She would have known what to say, how to read between the lines of a message like that. The hurt settled deeper, heavier. A kind of betrayal he had never prepared for. Quietly, almost without meaning to, he whispered into the still room, "What did I ever do to deserve this?" And as the words faded, the phone buzzed once more. Silent, persistent, waiting for him to look. But he didn't reach for it yet, because something inside him had just shifted, barely, subtly, like the first crack before an avalanche. Something was wrong. And he knew this Christmas would not stay quiet for long. The next morning, Walter stood outside Emily's workplace, a modern glass-walled office building downtown, the kind of place where everything looked polished, efficient, and cold. He hadn't slept much. The text from last night replayed again and again in his mind, each time feeling more impossible. He'd stared at his phone for hours, waiting for a follow-up message, an apology, something to hint that the coldness wasn't real. Nothing came. So he drove here, gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual, determined to see Emily face to face. He needed to look in her eyes. He needed to know what was happening. The automatic doors slid open with a low hiss as he stepped into the bright lobby. The air held that sterile, corporate scent, a mix of printer ink, citrus cleaning spray, and too much ambition. Receptionists typed briskly behind a marble desk. Phones rang. Footsteps echoed. Everyone moved quickly, purposefully. But Walter felt out of place, like a man from a different era dropped into a world that no longer recognized him. Then he saw her. Emily stepped out from the hallway, her handbag on her shoulder, her face framed by hair she hadn't dyed in months. For a moment, Walter felt relief wash through him. But then she noticed him, and her entire expression tightened. She forced a smile, not the warm, open one he'd known since she was a child, but something thin, practiced, stretched across worry. Her eyes refused to land on his for longer than a second. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she asked softly, almost whispering. Walter approached slowly, not wanting to overwhelm her. "I just wanted to talk, sweetheart, face to face. Yesterday's message didn't sound like..." Emily cut him off with a quick glance over her shoulder, the kind of fearful reflex that didn't belong to her. "This isn't a good time, really." Before Walter could respond, the elevator chimed and opened behind her. Out stepped Jason Dawson, crisp suit, sharp haircut, wearing the confidence of a man who believed every room belonged to him. He walked straight to Emily, placed an arm around her waist, not tenderly but possessively, like a silent declaration. Jason's smile was polite enough to fool strangers, but Walter could see the hostility beneath it. He'd seen that look for years, smirking superiority masking thin insecurity. "Walter," Jason said, nodding slowly, "didn't expect to see you here. Everything okay?" "I came to talk to my daughter," Walter replied, trying to keep his voice even. "Yesterday's message worried me." Jason chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "Yeah, well, young couples need space. Boundaries, you know how it is. Some parents have a hard time adapting." Emily's body stiffened beside him, but she didn't speak. She stared at the floor, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing for impact. Walter felt something inside him twist. "Emily never talked to me like that," he said quietly. "Not once." Jason shrugged, still smiling. "People change, we grow up, we learn what we want out of life." His voice lingered on those last words, deliberately pointed. Not everyone likes old-fashioned expectations or outdated ways of doing things. It was subtle, but the jab pierced clean. Old-fashioned, outdated, words meant to shrink a man, words meant to undermine, and Jason knew precisely how to deliver them, smoothly, lightly, with just enough venom to bruise. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Her hands trembled, barely noticeable but enough for Walter to catch. She didn't look at him. She didn't defend him. She didn't defend herself. She simply stood there, silent, frozen by the unspoken rule that Jason was the one allowed to steer the conversation. Jason's smile widened as he looked between them. "We're adults now, Walter," he said, patting Emily's shoulder as though she were a child. "We don't really need supervision anymore." Emily closed her eyes for a split second, a tiny flash of pain crossing her face. Walter saw it. A father always sees it. And in that one flicker, the truth hit him with a force he hadn't expected. Emily wasn't cold. Emily wasn't distant. Emily wasn't the one pushing him away. She was afraid. Jason's hand tightened on her side when she tried to step forward, and she immediately went still again. Too still, as if she'd been trained to freeze the moment he exerted pressure. Well, Tur felt the air in the room shift. Something ugly, something controlling, something unmistakably wrong pulsed beneath the surface of this interaction. He had come here hoping for clarity, but the ugly certainty forming in his chest was far more painful than any confusion. The message was Emily's voice. It was Jason's. And as Jason steered Emily back toward the elevator, turning her away from Walter with practiced ease, Walter understood that yesterday's text was only the beginning. The real battle had just stepped into the light, wearing a smirk. And Walter's next move would matter more than any he had made in years. Walter spent most of the next morning replaying the encounter in the lobby, searching every detail for meaning. Emily's forced smile, the stiffness in her shoulders, the way Jason's arm had tightened around her like a leash. He couldn't get any of it out of his head. He walked through the house without purpose, picking up objects only to set them down again. The ornaments on the tree looked different now, as if they belonged to a world that no longer existed. A knock sounded at the door just as he sat down with a lukewarm cup of coffee. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. When he opened the door, he found Mrs. Doyle standing on his porch, bundled in a thick wool coat, her white hair tucked beneath a knitted hat. She held a small tin of cookies in her gloved hands, but her eyes, normally bright, looked troubled. "Morning, Walter," she said gently. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You're never intruding, Martha. Come in before you catch cold." He stepped aside, and she shuffled in, brushing snowflakes from her coat. She set the cookie tin on the counter, but didn't offer her usual cheerful commentary about her baking. Instead, she folded her hands tightly, as though bracing herself. "I actually came because, well, I'm worried," she said quietly. Walter felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter air. About Emily. Mrs. Doyle nodded, her expression softening with sympathy. "I waited to say anything because it wasn't my place, but after the way she rushed out yesterday and the look on your face when you drove off, I just couldn't keep quiet anymore." Walter steadied himself against the counter. "Martha, please, whatever you know, just say it." She sighed, lowering her voice as if someone might be listening. "Last night around 10, I stepped outside to take the trash out and I heard shouting from their house. Jason's voice. Loud, angry. I couldn't make out everything he said, but he was furious. And Emily, she sounded so small, Walter, like she was apologizing just to calm him down." Walter felt a slow, painful tightening in his chest. The idea of Emily, his Emily, shrinking under someone else's rage, made something inside him twist violently. Mrs. Doyle continued, her eyes glistening. "And that's not the first time. I've heard her crying before, more than once, especially when your name gets brought up." Walter froze. "My name?" She nodded. "I've overheard them arguing through the patio door sometimes. Jason would mock her, asking why she still runs to Daddy for everything. And when she tries to defend you, she cries. Every time." Walter swallowed hard, guilt flooding him in heavy waves. Had he unknowingly made things worse for her? had his support, meant as love, protection, become ammunition in Jason's hands. Mrs. Doyle touched his arm gently. And there's something else. He looked at her sharply. What now? Her voice dropped even more. 2 weeks ago I was trimming my shrubs when I heard Jason on the phone outside. He didn't know I was there. He was laughing, bragging, really. Saying that once the house paperwork goes through, he'll have Emily exactly where he wants her. He said he'd cut off her father eventually. His words, not mine. The room seemed to tilt. Walter braced a hand on the table, feeling anger rise, not the fiery kind but the deep, cold kind that settles into bone. Cut off her father, he repeated, almost in disbelief. Mrs. Doyle nodded sadly. I've lived long enough to recognize a controlling man when I see one. And Jason, he's tightening the leash, Walter. Slowly, quietly. Emily's not pushing you away because she wants to. She's afraid. She's trying to survive. Walter felt the guilt twist deeper, mingling with something sharper, an emerging anger he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. For months he had brushed off the small signs, Emily canceling dinners, her nervous laughter, the way her eyes clouded when Jason interrupted her. He had told himself she was adjusting to married life. He had assumed she was happy. He had been wrong, blindly, painfully wrong. Mrs. Doyle reached for his hand, her voice softening. Listen to me, Walter. That girl loves you. She always has. Nothing about that text sounded like her. She's just stuck. She doesn't know how to pull away without him tearing her down. Walter's jaw tightened. A quiet resolve settled inside him, firm and unfaux. Giving. She shouldn't have to be stuck, he said, voice low. Not with him, not like this. Mrs. Doyle squeezed his hand one more time, then stepped back toward the door. Just keep an eye on her. She needs you more than she can admit. As she left, the house fell silent again, but it wasn't the empty kind of silence anymore. It was the heavy, watchful silence before a storm. And for the first time, Walter felt a darker suspicion forming clearly in his mind, one he could no longer ignore. Jason wasn't just pulling Emily away. He was controlling her. And Walter knew this was only the beginning of whatever he now had no choice but to do next. The morning after Mrs. Doyle's visit, Walter sat at his kitchen table with the mortgage folder open in front of him. He had looked at those documents 100 times over the years, paying each bill with quiet pride. He never told Emily how much he covered. He didn't want her to feel indebted. He just wanted her to have stability, something he and June had worked hard to build for her long before she ever knew the meaning of struggle. But now every number on the page felt tainted by uncertainty. Something was wrong. He could feel it, the way a man senses a storm long before clouds appear. Mrs. Doyle's words, Jason bragging he would cut off her father eventually, echoed like a warning bell. He dialed the mortgage company with a steady hand, though his pulse tapped harder against his skin than he wanted to admit. A soft-spoken representative answered, cheerful, unaware her words were about to shift the ground beneath him. Yes, Mr. Reed, let me pull up the account, she said pleasantly. One moment, okay, I have it here. What can I help you with? Walter cleared his throat. I just want to confirm the account status. Everything should be current. It is, she replied. Your payment posted 2 days ago. She paused. But I do see something unusual on the file, a recent request. Walter straightened. A request? Yes. Someone attempted to make changes to the payer authorization. The system flagged it because the signature didn't match previous records. A cold prickle ran down Walter's spine. Who submitted that request? It was signed under the name Jason Dawson. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Walter gripped the edge of the table. He tried to remove me. It appears he attempted to revise the payer structure. Essentially, he requested the account show only him and Emily as responsible parties, removing you as the silent contributor. Walter's mouth felt dry. Was Emily aware of this? I can't say, the representative answered carefully. But the request was denied for inconsistency. Still, it wasn't the only attempt. A fresh jolt hit him. There were others. Yes, a second request last week trying to transfer long-term payment history under Mr. Dawson's name. That one was also flagged. It seemed, she hesitated, strategic. Walter closed his eyes, anger simmering beneath his ribs. Strategic. Jason was trying to claim financial ground he had never earned. And Emily, sweet, trusting Emily, she had no idea any of this was happening. He forced his voice steady. Thank you. Please note that no changes are authorized, and if anyone tries again, I want immediate notification. Of course, Mr. Reed, I'll update the alert. When the call ended, the house fell silent, too silent. Walter stood slowly, gathering the scattered documents with trembling hands. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was written in forged signatures and unauthorized requests. Jason wasn't just pushing him out emotionally. He was trying to erase his presence entirely, from their home, their finances, their lives. And Emily was being dragged into it without even knowing. Walter grabbed his coat and keys, driving across town with purpose he hadn't felt in years. The snow had thickened, flakes swirling across the pavement like white ash. He pulled up outside a modest brick office with a faded sign, Carter and Shaw, attorneys at law. Inside, Neil Carter, tall, gray-haired, steady as bedrock, looked up from his desk. "Walter, you look like hell. What's wrong?" Walter didn't waste time. He placed the mortgage folder on the desk, opened it, and repeated everything the bank had told him. Neil listened closely, jaw tightening with each detail. When Walter finished, Neil leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This isn't just meddling, this is a setup." Walter's voice was tight. "Explain." "Jason's trying to reposition himself legally," Neil said. "If he can push you out of the financial picture, he gains leverage over the property. Eventually, he could pressure Emily into refinancing under his terms, maybe even force you out entirely. And if he gets her signature on anything without her understanding it." Walter cut him off, fury sharpening his tone. "She would never knowingly sign something that harms me." Neil nodded. "I know, which is why he's trying to do it without her knowledge. Quiet manipulation. This is a pattern, Walter. Men like Jason isolate, then take control where it hurts most: finances, stability, dependency." Walter looked down, fists closing. "Emily doesn't deserve this." "No," Neil agreed. "But if you keep paying silently, he'll tighten the noose. He's already trying to turn your generosity into a liability." Walter stared at the documents, his breath steadying, a new clarity rising inside him. For years he had helped from the background, never wanting to interfere, never wanting to embarrass his daughter or make her feel like she couldn't stand on her own. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about protection. He closed the folder gently, almost ceremonially. "No more quiet enabling," he said. Neil nodded once, recognizing the shift. "Good, because if you're ready to fight back, we need to start immediately." Walter rose from his chair, his jaw set, his purpose clear. The truth about the mortgage had done something to him, woken a part of him that had been dormant since June past. And as he walked out of the office into the cold, biting air, he understood one thing with absolute certainty. Jason had already crossed the line, and Walter would not let him cross another. The fifth evening of December settled over Walter's house like a cold sheet of glass. He'd been sitting in his recliner, a blanket over his knees, trying to read the same line of the same newspaper article for nearly half an hour when his phone buzzed. He expected another reminder from the pharmacy or a message from the church group. Instead, the notification preview showed one word that froze him in place: Emily. His pulse quickened. Maybe this was the apology he had hoped for. Maybe she'd finally broken free long enough to text him without Jason hovering. With hesitant hope, he opened the message. It wasn't a sentence. It wasn't an explanation. It was a photo. A group photo taken at a long holiday dinner table. Jason's family gathered around a roasted turkey, smiling into the camera. Emily sat among them but not beside her husband. She was placed 2 seats away from him, almost tucked into the background like an afterthought. Her smile wasn't real. It was tight, strained, her eyes hollow in a way Walter had never seen before. The woman beside her leaned in too close, as if claiming her, while Jason sat at the head of the table, lifted glass in hand, shining with smug confidence. Walter zoomed into the picture. Emily's hands were clasped together under the table, knuckles white. Her shoulders hugged inward. She looked like a guest, not a wife, and certainly not like a daughter who had just told her father to respect boundaries. Why had she sent this? Why send him a picture of a dinner he'd been excluded from? He stared at the image, searching for meaning, something hidden, something unsaid. Before he could form a thought, his phone buzzed again. Another message, not from Emily this time, but from Jason. Told you she's better off. There was no pretense of politeness this time, no passive-aggressive veil, just a blunt stab meant to hurt. The words landed like a strike across Walter's chest. He read it twice, then a third time, feeling the betrayal harden into something heavier, darker. Jason wanted him to see the picture, wanted him to understand that he had been replaced, deliberately, ruthlessly. Walter's fingers trembled around the phone. For the first time in years, he felt old, not in body, but in spirit, the way a father feels when he realizes someone has quietly stolen his place in his child's life. He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. The room felt smaller, as if grief had drawn the walls inward. Then the phone rang. A call not from Emily, not from an unknown number, but from Alyssa, her coworker. Walter hesitated before answering, surprised. "Alyssa, is everything all right?" Her voice came fast, cautious, almost urgent. "Mr. Reed, I'm so sorry to call you out of nowhere, but Emily left work early today. She looked awful. She was crying in the break room before she grabbed her things. She wouldn't tell anyone what happened." Walter's grip tightened. "Crying, did Jason?" "I don't know the details," Alyssa said quickly, but she kept saying she messed everything up, that she wished she could undo something. And then she mentioned the Christmas dinner. She wanted to invite you. Badly. She said she told Jason that you shouldn't spend the holiday alone." Walter stopped breathing for a second. Alyssa continued quietly. "He shut her down. Completely. He told her it would ruin the evening if you were there. She looked devastated when she said it, and I don't think she sent you that text by choice." Walter swallowed, his throat thickening. "Why do you say that?" "Because whenever she talks about you," Alyssa replied, "she gets emotional. Not angry, not distant, just sad. Like she's losing something she doesn't know how to save." The room blurred at the edges. Everything made sense now. Emily's stiff replies, her silent F. The forced messages. She wasn't pushing him away. She was being pushed, steered, controlled. And she didn't know how to tell him, because admitting it would mean admitting that her marriage, her carefully chosen life, was collapsing around her. Alyssa's voice softened. "She's trapped, Mr. Reed, not physically, but emotionally, and she's too ashamed to admit it's happening." Walter pressed a hand over his heart, feeling the pressure build. Every revelation sliced through him with precision, leaving no room for denial. Emily wasn't lost. She was drowning quietly, convinced no one would hear her if she called out. "Thank you for telling me," Walter murmured, steadying his breath. "I just thought you needed to know," Alyssa said gently. "She loves you, she really does." When the call ended, Walter stared again at the group photo. The fake smiles, the forced closeness, the hollow space around Emily where safety should have been. He saw the truth now, clear as the snowfall drifting past his window. Emily didn't choose to exclude him. She was being cut off, piece by piece. And Jason wanted him to witness it. Walter lowered the phone slowly, a quiet, steadfast resolve forming in his eyes. Something had shifted inside him. Not rage, not panic, but a hardened clarity he had not felt in years. Emily was in trouble, and the man who caused it had no idea what kind of father he had just provoked. Walter woke before dawn, long before the neighborhood stirred or the winter sun touched the street. The house was dim and silent, but his mind moved with sharp purpose. The betrayal had crystallized inside him overnight, not just emotional but strategic. Jason wasn't acting on impulse. He was executing a plan. And now, finally, Walter knew he needed one of his own. He pulled the banker's folder from the drawer, spreading statements across the table, mortgage receipts, tax assessments, payment histories, every scrap of paper tied to the house he'd quietly carried on his back for years. He worked slowly, methodically, the way he used to organize case files when he worked at the county office. His hands moved with discipline, but his jaw stayed tense, the memory of that holiday photo pulsing behind his eyes. By mid-morning, he had built a neat stack of documents. Then he called Neil. "I'm coming in," he said simply. 20 minutes later, Walter sat across from Neil Carter again, the weight of the folder between them like a loaded weapon. Neil flipped through the pages, nodding with increasing seriousness. When he reached the end, he drew a long breath. "All right," Neil said. "If Jason is trying to alter records or push you out financially, we need to freeze everything tied to the property, temporarily, long enough to investigate." Walter leaned forward. "Can you do that?" "I can file an emergency request," Neil said, already scribbling notes. "Given the forged signature attempts and your consistent payment history, it'll hold. He won't be able to refinance, transfer, or modify anything without the courts say so." Walter felt a satisfaction he hadn't tasted in weeks. Not triumph, just control, regained piece by piece. Then Neil hesitated, tapping his pen. "I also reached out to a contact at the precinct. Henderson, you remember her. The detective, from the zoning fraud case years ago." "She's still with the department," Neil said. "I asked her to run background. Nothing formal yet, just preliminary inquiries." He paused. "And she found something." A cold alert ran through Walter's body. "What?" Neil lowered his voice. "Jason has been looked into before, complaints from a past girlfriend. Nothing that escalated to charges, but enough to leave a mark. Coercive behavior, financial pressure, isolating her from her family, same pattern." Walter's stomach sank slowly, like a stone dropping through dark water. "Emily doesn't know," he said softly. "No," Neil agreed. "And if she did, she never would have married him." The words landed heavily. Walter sat still for a moment, absorbing the truth, the confirmation of what he already sensed. Jason wasn't fumbling through anger. He was calculated, practiced. This wasn't his first time tightening control around someone. Walter stood abruptly. "I'm going to the mortgage office." Neil looked up. "Be careful what you say, don't tip him off yet." "I won't," Walter said. "I'm just updating my information." But they both knew that wasn't the real reason. The mortgage office was warm and overdecorated with tinsel, holiday wreaths, and red bows taped to desks. A bell jingled as Walter stepped inside. The young teller from before, Kara, recognized him and smiled politely. "Mr. Reed, updating contact info today." "That's right," Walter said with a friendly nod. "Thought I'd make sure everything on file is current. Holidays get busy." She typed briskly, then frowned slightly. "Looks like there was an attempted update recently, not from you." Walter played dumb. "Oh." "Yes," she said, "same as before, Mr. Dawson. Tried again to adjust payer authorization last week. The system declined it, but it's clear he's persistent." Persistent, manipulative, desperate. Walter kept his expression neutral. "I appreciate you letting me know." She nodded sympathetically. "We flagged the account for extra verification. No one can change anything without you present now." "Good," Walter said. "That's very good." When he stepped out into the crisp air, snowflakes were drifting lightly, catching in his hair and the folds of his coat. He walked slowly to his car, hands in his pockets, mind sharper than it had been in months. He now had confirmation from the bank, from Neil, from the detective, from the patterns repeating like clockwork. Jason wasn't guessing his way through dominance. He was orchestrating it. Quiet pressure on Emily, quiet removal of Walter, quiet acquisition of the house. But Walter was no longer quiet. That era was over. He went home and sat at the dining table again, opening a new notebook. Every call, every forged signature, every message, every pattern, he wrote them down meticulously. Dates, times, details. He wasn't gathering notes. He was building a case. A case against the man who thought intelligence belonged to the young and vulnerability to the old. Walter capped the pen, leaned back and whispered into the empty room, calmly, with conviction. You picked the wrong old man to underestimate. And as the winter light dimmed behind the curtains, it became clear. The first countermove had been made. The next one would not be gentle. It was close to midnight when Walter heard the knock, 3 soft taps, barely audible over the hum of the heater. He sat up slowly in his recliner, unsure if he'd imagined it. No one visited him this late. No one ever knocked gently. The second set of taps came quicker, sharper, tinged with urgency. Walter stood, heart tightening. He walked to the door quietly, almost afraid to hope. When he opened it, the porch light cast a pale circle across the snow, and in the center of it stood Emily. Her coat was buttoned unevenly. Her shoulders shivered, not entirely from cold. Her eyes were red, swollen, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as though she'd run here rather than driven. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling, "can I come in?" Walter didn't answer with words. He stepped aside immediately, ushering her inside, closing the door behind her with careful, silent precision. Emily stood in the entryway, staring at the floor, fingers twisting nervously. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 days. He spoke softly, afraid sound alone might shatter her. "Emily, what's wrong?" She exhaled a shaky breath, then pressed both hands to her face. When she lowered them, tears traced down her cheeks. "I didn't know where else to go." Walter guided her to the couch but didn't touch her until she sat. Only then did he place a careful hand on her back. She inhaled sharply, as if the small gesture was more comfort than she'd felt in months. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Jason would lose his mind if he knew." Walter froze, though he'd suspected as much. Hearing it spoken aloud made the air in the room feel heavier. "He forbids you from seeing me?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, eyes filling again. He says you meddle, that you make me doubt him, that you're trying to control our marriage." She wiped her cheeks, but more tears followed. "But you're not, you never have. You've only ever tried to help me and I—" Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Dad." Walter swallowed, feeling both grief and anger rise inside him. He kept his voice steady. "Sweetheart, none of this is your fault." She shook her head violently. "Yes, it is. That text I sent, the one telling you not to come for Christmas, I didn't write it. Jason typed it. He stood over me while I sent it." She covered her face again, sobbing. "He reads my messages, every call, every email. He checks my phone when he thinks I'm asleep." Walter felt his breath stop in his throat. A cold, controlled fury spread through his chest, but he kept every trace of it off his face. Emily didn't need anger right now. She needed safety. She inhaled shakily, gathering the courage to continue. "He knows you still help with the mortgage," she said. "He hates it. He says it makes him look weak, like he can't provide. He said it makes him feel less of a man." Walter's jaw tightened. He remembered every payment he'd made, always quietly, always with love. To know that the help meant to lighten their burden was being twisted into resentment. It cut deeper than he expected. Emily leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped so tight her knuckles paled. "I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own house. He gets angry so fast, over nothing. If I ask a question, he says I'm challenging him. If I want to visit you, he says I'm choosing you over him. And if I try to stand up for myself, he shuts down for hours." She swallowed hard. Sometimes days. Walter sat beside her, steady and silent, letting her speak at her own pace. "I thought I could handle it. I thought it was just stress." Her voice cracked. "But I'm scared now. I don't even recognize myself. I feel trapped, Dad, and I don't know how to get out." She collapsed into tears then, raw, unrestrained, years of fear and shame spilling out at once. Walter pulled her gently against him, holding her the way he had when she was a child waking from nightmares. He didn't rush her, didn't instruct, didn't try to fix everything in one breath. He only held her until her shaking eased. When she finally lifted her head, eyes swollen, she whispered, "Please don't tell Jason I came here." Walter brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch steady. "I won't. You're safe here, always." Emily nodded, though she looked unconvinced, like safety was a foreign word now, one she barely remembered the meaning of. Walter didn't ask her to leave Jason. He didn't push her toward decisions she wasn't ready to make. He understood that leaving a man like Jason required planning, timing, and protection, things she didn't have yet. But he did make a silent decision of his own. He would help her escape. Carefully, quietly, strategically. He would not let Jason break her. As Emily wiped her eyes and tried to steady her breathing, Walter looked toward the dark window, seeing not his reflection, but the gathering storm outside. This wasn't the end of her confession. It was only the beginning of his intervention. Christmas morning arrived quietly in Walter's house, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, only hollow. He'd cooked out of habit, not appetite. Scrambled eggs, cinnamon rolls, the ham he used to make when Emily was little. The food sat untouched on the dining table, steam fading into the still air. The tree lights glowed softly, casting warm reflections across the empty chairs. For years, Christmas had been the day that pulled them together. Now it was the day that exposed just how far apart they drifted. Walter sat with his hands folded, staring at the spread as though it belonged to someone else's home, some other father still surrounded by laughter and wrapping paper. He lifted a fork, set it down, lifted it again. Nothing tasted right when eaten alone, especially not on a morning meant for family. He tried to distract himself, turned on the radio, muted it again, walked to the window, then back to the table. But the quiet wouldn't let him rest. The silence felt wrong, unsettling, like the precursor to something about to break. Then his phone rang. He didn't expect a call today, not from anyone who mattered. But when he saw the name on the screen, his breath caught. "Emily." He answered instantly, "Sweetheart." What came through wasn't her usual voice. It was a whisper, ragged, fragile, rushed. "Dad, I'm in the bathroom. I don't have long." Walter stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly behind him. "Emily, what's going on?" She inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. Jason's screaming again. "He's been yelling since last night. He thinks I ruined Christmas. He thinks I embarrassed him." Her voice cracked, trembling. "I just needed to hear you, just for a second." In the background, a man's voice roared, muffled but unmistakably furious. Something slammed against a wall. Walter heard glass shatter. His skin went cold. "Emily," he said, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened, "I'm coming to get you." "No," she hissed, panicked. "Dad, no, please. If he sees you, if he thinks I called you, it'll get worse. Please don't come here." Another crash exploded behind her. She flinched audibly. "Oh God, he's breaking things." Walter felt his pulse hammering, adrenaline pushing reason aside. "Emily, listen to me. This isn't just an argument. This is dangerous." "I know," she whispered. I don't know what to do. I'm scared." Her voice shook with a helplessness so raw it pierced him. "But please, Dad, don't show up. I can't protect you from him if you do." Walter closed his eyes, jaw trembling with held-back rage. He wanted to drive over immediately, kick the door down, pull her out. But the fear in her voice stopped him. Fear not of Jason alone, but of escalation. She knew his patterns better than anyone. She wasn't asking for help. She was begging for survival. Another scream erupted behind her, louder this time. Jason's voice tore through the line, indistinct words but unmistakable fury. Emily whimpered. "I have to go," she whispered. "Please don't hang up angry with me, please." The call cut abruptly. Walter stared at the silent phone, something inside him breaking cleanly in two. This wasn't emotional abuse anymore. This wasn't manipulation. This was a household turning violent, and Emily, his daughter, was trapped inside it. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, snatched his keys, then stopped. Emily didn't want him coming. She feared Jason would hurt him. And as much as Walter wanted to protect her with his own hands, he understood that charging into danger wouldn't save her. It would only give Jason another weapon. So he made the call he'd been trying to avoid. Detective Henderson answered on the second ring. "Reed, it's Christmas, what's?" "It's my daughter," Walter said, voice tight, breath uneven. "Something's wrong," he's screaming at her. "I heard things breaking. She's scared to death." Henderson's tone shifted instantly from casual to crisp, professional concern. "Address." He gave it, she repeated it back, already moving. "We'll send a unit for a wellness check. Stay available. If anything changes, call me directly." Minutes later, though it felt like hours, Walter watched from his front window as snow drifted down in thick flakes. He imagined Emily in that bathroom, phone clutched in shaking hands, trying not to breathe too loudly. He paced until his legs ached. Eventually, Henderson called back. "We made contact," she reported. "Emily answered the door. She looked shaken, but she told us everything was fine, said they just had a minor disagreement." Walter closed his eyes. Shame, fear, survival instinct, he knew why she lied. Henderson's voice gentled. "We can't force entry without cause, but I'm flagging the address. If anything else happens, we respond immediately." Walter thanked her, his voice hollow. When the call ended, he stood alone again in his living room, tree lights flickering softly, breakfast cold, house silent. But now the quiet didn't feel hollow. It felt dangerous. Emily had lied to police to protect the man hurting her. And Walter knew this was the breaking point, not for Emily but for him. He couldn't stay passive anymore. Christmas morning had just turned into a battlefield. The morning after the police visit, Walter forced himself out of the house, though every part of him wanted to sit by the phone and wait for Emily to call, to whisper that she was safe. But she needed space, and he needed to think clearly. So he grabbed a short grocery list and headed to the only store open early, the neighborhood market where everyone eventually crossed paths. He walked the aisles slowly, more out of distraction than purpose, picking up items he didn't truly need. A carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, tea bags. He tried to focus on the ordinary rhythm of the morning, but his mind kept drifting back to the sound of shattering glass through the phone, Emily's frantic whisper, the fear he could practically feel radiating through the line. He rounded a corner toward the dairy section and froze. Jason stood at the far end of the aisle, eyes locked onto him with a glare sharp enough to cut. He wasn't dressed for the day, just sweatpants, an unzipped hoodie, hair unkempt, jaw clenched. He looked like a man who hadn't slept and didn't intend to. Before Walter could turn away, Jason marched down the aisle toward him. "Well, isn't this convenient?" Jason said, voice low, edged with venom, running into the man who can't stop meddling. Walter kept his expression steady. "Jason, I don't want trouble." "Oh, I think you do," Jason spat, "since you've made it your mission to ruin my marriage." A shopper down the aisle glanced over. Walter stepped back, not out of fear but to keep the conversation from becoming a spectacle. "I've done nothing of the sort. I'm trying to make sure my daughter is safe." Jason barked a laugh. "Safe from what? Her own husband." He stepped closer, breath hot with rage. "You're poisoning her against me, you're interfering in our home, and I'm done with it." Walter didn't flinch. Emily reached out to me because she needed support. Jason's composure cracked. She wouldn't need support if U.S. topped undermining me. His voice rose sharply, drawing a few stares. You think I don't know what you did, calling the cops, trying to embarrass me? Walter exhaled slowly. I called because I heard things breaking. I heard her fear. Jason's face twisted, fury tightening every muscle. For a moment, Walter wondered if he might shove him. Instead, Jason jabbed a finger toward Walter's chest. This is harassment. You're stalking our marriage. You're trying to make Emily choose you over me. And if you keep this up, I'll file a complaint. A real one. Harassment, emotional interference, whatever the hell the officer writes down. Walter studied him, not the words, but the man behind them. Jason wasn't just angry, he was cornered. His pupils were dilated, his breathing quick, his stance unsteady. This wasn't strength. This was unraveling. I'm not intimidated, Walter said softly. I just want my daughter safe. Jason's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. You're pathetic, he hissed. An old man with nothing better to do than insert himself where he isn't wanted. Walter didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he asked calmly, why are you so afraid of her talking to me? For a split second, Jason's expression shifted, from fury to something closer to panic. Then he turned sharply, almost stumbling as he stormed down the aisle and out of sight, leaving the air charged with tension. Walter let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. As he walked to the checkout, a familiar voice called his name. Detective Henderson stood near the entrance, coffee in hand. She must have been grabbing supplies before her shift. She approached him with a cautious expression. You okay? She asked quietly. I'm fine, Walter said. Just an unpleasant run-in. She nodded. I saw. He's coming apart at the seams. She sipped her coffee, studying him carefully. My contact at the Financial Crimes Unit looked into him a bit more informally. Debt collectors have been after him for months. He's drowning in overdue bills. Walter stiffened. Debt collectors. Big ones, she said. Credit cards, personal loans, a failed investment. He's desperate for financial leverage. And desperate people, they get unpredictable. Walter absorbed this in silence, every puzzle piece clicking into place with terrifying clarity. Jason wasn't just controlling Emily out of ego. He wasn't just isolating her. He wasn't just resentful of Walter's support. He needed the house. He needed the asset. He needed control of something valuable before the financial walls around him collapsed. And the easiest way to do that was to push Walter out of the equation entirely, legally, emotionally, financially. Everything Jason had done, the forged signatures, the pressure on Emily, the aggressive outbursts, were not random. They were steps. Calculated steps. Henderson lowered her voice. Be careful, Walter. Men in deep debt do stupid things. Walter nodded slowly. Thank you truly. As he carried his small bag of groceries to his car, the winter wind cut through his coat, but he barely felt it. His mind was too sharp, too alive, too aware of what he was up against. Jason wasn't fighting for pride. He was fighting for survival. And Emily was trapped in the middle. Walter set the groceries on the passenger seat, gripping the wheel with steady resolve. Now he finally understood Jason's endgame. And knowing a man's motives was the first step to taking him down completely. The envelope arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon, slipped through Walter's mail slot with the same harmless whisper as any other bill. He picked it up without thinking, expecting a utilities statement or a holiday donation request. But the return address froze him mid-step. The mortgage servicing department. For a moment he felt nothing, just a quiet, sinking suspicion. Then he tore it open. Inside was a crisp, formal letter with bold print across the top. Notice of refinance processing. Action required. Walter blinked hard, reading the sentence twice, then 3 times. Refinance. Processing. His name was printed on the account summary, but not as the primary contact. And beside his name, stamped in digital ink, were the words, "Authorization received." His stomach dropped. He hadn't authorized anything. He flipped the page, heart thudding. Attached was a scanned form, electronic signature dated 2 days ago. Except it wasn't his signature. Not even close. Someone had traced the shape of his name, approximated the swoop of the W and the tail of the R, but it was sloppy, rushed, done by someone who assumed no one was paying attention. Jason. The thought didn't appear gradually. It struck, clear and sharp. Walter's pulse hammered as he flipped through the remaining pages. The refinance request wasn't just cosmetic. It attempted to restructure the loan under new terms, listing 3 parties. Jason Dawson, primary. Emily Dawson, co-borrower. Walter Reed, guarantor. Guarantor. Walter felt heat rush to his face, anger, betrayal, disbelief colliding all at once. Jason wasn't just trying to push him out. He was trying to tie Walter to his debts. The phone slipped in Walter's hands as he called Neil, reading off line after line through clenched teeth. "Bring the paperwork," Neil said immediately, voice sharp with urgency. "Right now." Walter didn't bother with a coat. He drove fast through the winter wind, knuckles white against the steering wheel. When he rushed into Neil's office, the attorney was already standing, clearing space on the desk. Walter laid the documents down. Neil scanned them rapidly, his brows knitting deeper with each passing second. Then he exhaled a long, low whistle. "This is bad," Neil said. "Really bad, not for you but for him." Walter didn't respond. He stared at the paperwork, his anger simmering quietly, tightly controlled. Neil pointed to the forged signature. "This is fraud, pure, federal-level financial fraud, and whoever did this didn't even bother to hide it well." "He tried to make me liable," Walter said, voice low, "for his debts." Neil nodded grimly. "If this had gone through, you'd be responsible for anything defaulted. Thousands, maybe more. Jason is drowning financially, and he's looking for someone to pull under with him." Walter swallowed, jaw tightening. "And Emily?" Neil sighed. "She's listed as a co-borrower. She's now legally entangled in the attempt. Even though she didn't sign anything, this could have hurt her credit for years." The realization sliced through Walter, clean, deep, merciless. Jason hadn't just targeted him. He'd targeted his daughter. Suddenly the anger wasn't hot. It was cold. A steady, chilling clarity that replaced everything else. Neil leaned forward. "We'll file a fraud report. Immediately. I'll alert the mortgage company and freeze all activity on the account until the investigation is complete." Walter nodded, though his hands trembled. "I want everything documented, every attempt he's made, every signature he's forged." "It will be," Neil assured him. "And Walter, this isn't going to end quietly for him." Just then Walter's phone buzzed. "Emily." Her voice came through soft, tentative. "Dad, are you home? Jason left for work early. I need to talk to you." Walter stepped into the hallway for privacy. "Emily, listen to me. There's something I need to show you." "What is it?" she asked, but her tone carried fear, fear she didn't even try to disguise. When he returned home, she was already sitting on the couch, wringing her hands. Walter placed the refinance documents in front of her. Her face drained of color. He put my name on this," she whispered. "Without telling me." Her hands began to shake. "Dad, I didn't sign anything, I swear, I would never." Walter placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "I know, I believe you." "But why would he?" Her voice broke before she finished the sentence. Walter didn't tell her the full truth. Not yet. About debt collectors, desperation, or the pattern of financial entanglement. But she saw enough to understand the betrayal. Her eyes filled with tears, shame, shock, fear, blending into something raw. "He used us," she whispered, He used me. Walter felt something inside his chest twist painfully. But he didn't crumble, not this time. He steadied his breath and shut the folder firmly. "It's time," he said quietly, "time for a countermove." Emily looked up, confused, frightened. In Walter's eyes, calm, resolved, held the first spark of a man done being prey. The ambush had failed. Now it was his turn. Walter had always believed that the quietest decisions were often the most powerful. That morning, as he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee, he made one of the quietest and most consequential decisions of his life. He stopped every payment. One by one, he logged into each account tied to Emily and Jason's household: mortgage, utilities, phone plans, insurance. His fingers moved steadily without hesitation. He canceled automatic transfers. He removed his information. He severed ties he had held for years. The screen flashed confirmation messages: canceled, removed, deactivated. Each one felt like cutting a thread Jason had wrapped around both Emily and the house. When the last account closed, Walter exhaled slowly, not out of relief, out of readiness. Jason had made their lives dependent on Walter's money. Now he would feel what dependence felt like when the lifeline vanished. By the end of the week, the consequences arrived. The first notice came to their house: mortgage payment overdue. The second, utility bill past due, service interruption pending. The third, urgent, account delinquent. Inside their home, Jason unraveled fast. Emily called Walter, voice trembling. "Dad, something's wrong with the bills. The accounts are bouncing back. The mortgage company says the payment never arrived. Do you know anything about that?" Walter heard panic under her confusion. He stayed steady. "Yes," he said gently. "I stop. Paying." There was a long silence on the phone. Emily wasn't angry, only shocked, uncertain. "Why, Dad, why now? Everything is falling apart here." Walter took a breath. "Sweetheart, because you need to see what happens when Jason has to stand on his own legs." Emily didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, unsteady. "He's upset." But upset didn't begin to describe the storm brewing. Because within hours of the payment stopping, Jason's carefully hidden debts snapped into the open like overstretched wires. The collectors who had been circling him quietly now moved in loudly. The phone rang relentlessly. Emails poured in, demands, threats, final notices. And Jason's composure, the facade he had held with such arrogance, fractured instantly. "Why are they calling here?" Emily asked him. "What did you do to our accounts? Why is everything in your name?" But Jason didn't answer her questions. He redirected them, turned them into accusations. "This is your father's fault," he shouted. "He's sabotaging us. He's punishing me for trying to be the head of this family." Emily flinched at the volume, stunned. "But Dad didn't take out your loans or max out your cards." Jason's face twisted. "You're taking his side again." Walter heard this secondhand, because Emily had begun recording their arguments. Not for retaliation, but because she was finally afraid she would forget the truth if she didn't capture it. Every time Jason exploded, every time he blamed her, every time he tried to rewrite a moment, she pressed record. And Walter documented everything, not to use against Jason yet, but because evidence was a kind of shield, one Emily desperately needed. The next blow came 3 days later when the water company sent a shut-off warning. Jason erupted. He slammed cabinet doors, paced the living room, muttered furiously into his phone as he tried to negotiate extensions he couldn't afford. Emily watched him, realization creeping into her eyes like slow dawn. She called Walter late that night. "He's losing control," she whispered. "He's desperate, and I don't think he cares who he hurts trying to keep everything from falling apart." Walter listened quietly, letting her speak, letting her thoughts form without pushing them. She continued. "I always thought he was stressed. misunderstood, trying his best, but now I'm seeing him clearly. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from awakening. He doesn't want a partner, she said softly. He wants someone to blame. Walter closed his eyes, the weight of her words hitting him. Emily, I'm proud of you. This is the first step. She exhaled shakily. Dad, have you known all along? No, Walter said honestly. But once I saw the signs, I couldn't ignore them, and neither should you. Down the street, in her dimly lit living room, Emily looked around at the stacks of overdue notices, the blinking caller ID of collectors, the frantic man pacing behind a facade that had finally cracked. For the first time, she didn't feel guilty for questioning him. She felt justified. That night, as Jason raged in the next room, Emily sat on the edge of her bed and whispered into the phone. I think I know who he really is now. Walter felt a cold, steady determination settle into place. Good. Because once Emily saw clearly, she wouldn't go back to blindness. And once Jason realized he was losing control, he would make his next move, reckless, predictable, dangerous. Which meant Walter's next move had to be ready. Jason's unraveling didn't happen quietly. It tore through his life with the speed of a collapsing structure, all the weak beams finally giving way at once. The first crack came at work. Emily learned about it in a blunt, two-line email from HR that arrived on a Tuesday morning. Jason Dawson's employment has been terminated effective immediately. Please return any company property on his behalf. Emily stared at the message in disbelief, hands trembling. She didn't have to guess what happened. For weeks, Jason's temper had been simmering dangerously close to the surface, boiling over in muttered rants and smashed cabinet doors. It was only a matter of time before he exploded somewhere public. That afternoon, a coworker of Jason's called Emily quietly, almost apologetically. He got into it with his supervisor, shouting match. Security had to escort him out. I thought you should know. Emily hung up with a hollow feeling, a sinking realization that this wasn't a downturn. This was the beginning of freefall. Jason came home that night with a bottle in his hand and fury clouding his face. He slammed the front door hard enough to shake picture frames on the wall. They fired me because of him, Jason spat, pacing the living room. Your father has poisoned everything. Emily stood frozen at the doorway. Jason, your behavior. Don't, he snapped, jabbing a finger toward her. Don't defend him. You think I don't know he's behind the collector's calling? Or the mortgage freeze. He's trying to make me look weak. Emily backed away slowly, fear whispering through her chest. She had learned in recent months, any attempt to reason with him only fueled him further. Jason drank half the bottle within an hour. His words slurred, anger turning volatile, unpredictable. When he kicked over a dining chair and it splintered on the floor, Emily felt something inside her break as well. She grabbed her coat and keys without a word. Jason didn't notice she was leaving. He was too busy spiraling. Emily drove straight to Walter's house, headlights cutting through the cold night. She didn't knock. She walked in with swollen eyes and shaking hands, and Walter knew instantly something had changed. What happened? He asked, gently guiding her to the couch. She took a trembling breath. He lost his job, he's drinking, he broke furniture, I couldn't stay, I didn't feel safe. Walter closed his eyes briefly, absorbing her words with a heaviness that settled deep in his chest. He had prepared for this moment in theory, but the reality of seeing his daughter flee her own home scraped something raw inside him. You did the right thing, Walter said softly. Emily nodded, wiping her tears, but her voice cracked. He's going to blame you for everything. And he did. The voicemail started within an hour, first angry, then vicious, then incoherent. You think you're helping. You think she'll stay with you. She'll come crawling back once she sees what you really are, manipulative, pathetic. Another voicemail poured in minutes later. You took her from me. "You're destroying my life, old man. You're going to regret this." Walter saved each recording, forwarding them to Detective Henderson exactly as she'd instructed. "These are perfect," Henderson said over the phone, her tone hard with purpose. "They show instability, threats, fixation, escalating aggression. Keep sending everything." For the first time, Walter understood the weight in her voice. Not fear, but strategy. They weren't just gathering complaints. They were building a legal wall around Emily. And Jason didn't even realize he was supplying the bricks. Emily slept in Walter's guest room that night, though slept was generous. She lay awake for hours, listening to her own heartbeat, waiting for her phone to buzz with another venom-filled voicemail. Walter checked on her quietly, cracked the door once or twice, but didn't enter. She needed space. She needed safety. She needed both without pressure. The next morning, Emily approached him with tired eyes and a new firmness in her voice. "Dad, can we install cameras at your house, and maybe at mine, just until things calm down?" Walter didn't hesitate. He bought a set of security cameras within the hour. Together, they positioned them at entry points, doors, windows. Emily guided him with the precision of someone who no longer trusted chance. "There," she said softly, adjusting the angle of the last camera. "If he comes here, if he tries anything, we'll have proof." Walter watched her, noting the shift, fear still present but layered now with something sharper. Awareness, clarity, resolve. As evening settled, Walter reviewed the voicemails again, each one more unhinged than the last. The emotional battlefield had shifted. Jason was no longer the one controlling the narrative. Walter was. He had the evidence. He had the legal support. He had Emily's trust back. And Jason, drinking, unraveling, cornered by debt and ego, was running out of places to hide. Walter clicked off the final voicemail and whispered to himself, "It's almost time," because the downward spiral was reaching its final turns. And soon, Jason would hit the bottom hard. Jason discovered where Emily was staying on a cold Wednesday night, long after the street lamps had settled into their usual hum and the neighborhood had surrendered to sleep. Walter and Emily had just finished a quiet dinner, simple soup, soft rolls, nothing heavy, when Emily's phone lit up with a string of missed calls. Then another. Then a text. "I know where you are." Emily went pale. Walter saw the terror flicker across her face, brief but unmistakable, like a child seeing lightning too close. "He's coming," she whispered. Walter stood slowly. "He won't get inside." At first they heard nothing. Then, at 1:17 a.m., a violent pounding rattled the front door. 3 thunderous blows, then another 3, each one harder than the last, shaking picture frames on the walls. "Open the door," Jason's voice slashed through the quiet, thick with alcohol and rage. "Emily, I know you're in there." Emily backed away instinctively, hands pressed to her mouth. Walter put a steady arm in front of her and stepped closer to the door, but not close enough to be seen. The camera above the entryway blinked red, capturing everything. Walter kept his voice calm. "Jason, leave. You're not welcome here." Jason slammed his fist against the door again. "You're kidnapping my wife." Emily flinched, shaking her head. "I left voluntarily," she whispered, though Jason couldn't hear her. Walter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "She is safe. Go home, Jason." Jason laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Safe, safe. She belongs with her husband, not with some washed-up old man who wants to control everything." Another crash hit the door, this time his shoulder. Emily gasped and stepped backward until her back hit the wall. Walter inhaled slowly, grounding himself. Everything in him wanted to yank the door open and end this, but he wasn't dealing with a rational man. He was dealing with a cornered one, a man whose world was collapsing and who believed force could rebuild it. "Jason," Walter said again, voice level as stone, You should leave before you say something you can't take back." Jason exploded. "I'll have you arrested, I'll take you to court. I'll sue you for interference, harassment, emotional damage, everything. You hear me?" Walter remained still. Let the camera record every word. Jason kicked the door. "I am not losing her." Inside, Emily covered her ears. Her breath came in sharp, uneven bursts, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered, "he's not going to stop." A moment later, Jason's rage turned to desperation. His voice cracked, wobbling under its own volatility. "Emily, please, please come out. I need you. I can't do this without you." Walter recognized the shift, the manipulator switching tactics, appealing to guilt. He'd seen enough in life to know exactly what Jason was doing. Emily, however, looked crushed by the plea, torn, exhausted, but she didn't move. Walter placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't go near that door." Outside, Jason's tone flipped again, dark and venomous. "Fine. If you won't come out, then you'll hear from my lawyer. I'll take everything. I swear it." Then, with one final roar of frustration, he hammered the door with both fists and stomped away, cursing into the freezing night. Walter waited until the car engine screeched down the street before he exhaled. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was strained, heavy, shaped by the echoes of what had just happened. Emily sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "He's lost his mind," she whispered. "He's completely lost it." Walter sat beside her but didn't touch her until she leaned toward him on her own. "He's unraveling because he's losing control," Walter said softly. "This is what happens when someone like him realizes fear doesn't work anymore." Emily lifted her head, eyes swollen, voice small. "Dad, I don't want to go back, not ever. I can't live like that again." Walter's heart squeezed, both relieved and shattered by her admission. He had been waiting, praying, for her to reach this moment. Not because he wanted the marriage to end, but because he wanted her to survive it. "You want out," Walter said gently, settling the truth into the air. Emily nodded, tears slipping down again. "Yes, I want out." Walter stood, pulled out his phone, and dialed Neil immediately. Within minutes, Neil was drafting paperwork, temporary protective orders, documentation requests, filings to escalate the fraud investigation. Lines of defense began forming in legal ink. "Send me the footage," Neil said firmly, "every second of it." When Walter hung up, he turned back to Emily. She looked fragile but steadier than before, like someone lifting a weight she had carried too long. Walter knelt in front of her, took her shaking hands, and said the words he had been holding inside since the day this began. "I'll get you out safely, trust me." Emily nodded, gripping tight. Outside, the night was still, but not calm, not anymore. Because the man who had pounded on Walter's door wasn't done. And the man inside the house wasn't afraid. The courthouse always smelled faintly of old paper and cold marble, an institutional quiet that made even confident people walk a little softer. But as Emily stepped inside, flanked by Walter on one side and Neil on the other, she felt anything but soft. She felt brittle, like a piece of glass trying not to crack under the weight of her own fear. Her hands trembled as she clutched the folder Neil had prepared for her, documentation, statements, timestamps, the financial evidence that had finally pushed her to this point. She had barely slept in 2 nights. Walter noticed the faint tremor in her shoulders and placed a gentle hand against her back. "I'm right here," he murmured, "every step." Emily nodded, inhaling shakily. Neil guided them toward the clerk's counter. "Once we file," he whispered, "you're protected. Whatever Jason thinks he can do, this stops the moment the orders are signed." Emily swallowed. "I know, her voice wavered. "I never imagined my marriage would end like this." Walter squeezed her arm softly. "You didn't fail, sweetheart, you survived." Those words steadied her enough to sign. Her signature, firm but quivering, landed. "Ed, on the divorce petition, that marked the official beginning of the end. But the moment the pen left the page, a voice pierced the air, sharp, furious, echoing through the hallway. "Are you kidding me?" Emily froze. Walter tensed. Jason stormed around the corner, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed in his temple. He wasn't dressed for court. He wasn't dressed for anything except rage. Wrinkled clothes, unshaven face, wild energy leaking out of every movement. "You really did it," he hissed at Emily, stepping forward. You actually filed." Neil moved in front of her instantly. "Mr. Dawson, keep your distance." "Shut up," Jason barked. "This is between me and my wife." "She's not alone," Walter said, voice steady but iron-hard. Jason whipped toward him with unfiltered hatred. "Of course she's not alone, because you won't stop interfering. You've ruined my marriage. You've poisoned her against me. You've destroyed my life." People in the lobby stopped walking. Heads turned. A security guard stepped closer. Emily shook her head, tears brimming. "Jason, please don't do this here." Jason jabbed a finger toward her. "You think this will protect you? Filing some stupid paperwork. You don't get to walk away from me." Detective Henderson appeared almost on cue, having been alerted by courthouse security. She approached with controlled authority. "Mr. Dawson, lower your voice." Jason ignored her completely. "This old man," he pointed at Walter, voice cracking with rage, "has turned you into his puppet." Walter didn't react, but Emily did. She stepped closer to her father without thinking, the movement small but unmistakable. Jason saw it and snapped. He lunged forward, not touching her, but closing the distance enough that Emily recoiled. That was all Henderson needed. She grabbed Jason's arm firmly. "That's enough, step back right now." "Don't touch me," Jason roared, jerking his arm, causing papers on a nearby desk to flutter. The security guard moved in. Henderson's tone dropped, low and unmistakably commanding. "If you continue this, you will be removed." Jason glared at the officers, at Henderson, at Walter, then finally at Emily. His breathing was heavy, erratic. "You're making a huge mistake," he spat. "All of you." Henderson nodded at the guard. "Escort him outside until he can behave." Jason thrashed once, then gave up, letting himself be pulled toward the doors while shouting, "This isn't over." The doors slammed behind him. Silence seeped slowly back into the hallway. Emily's knees weakened. Walter caught her arm before she could stumble. "It's all right," he whispered. "He can't touch you." "Not anymore." Neil cleared his throat gently. "We should go to the hearing room. The judge needs to see the evidence today." Inside the courtroom, everything felt colder, more official. Emily sat beside Walter at the long table as Neil presented the refinance documents, the forged signature, the attempted transfer, the illegitimate liability terms. Henderson submitted Jason's voicemails and the footage from Walter's door camera. The judge reviewed each item with growing severity. "This is substantial," she finally said, looking over her glasses at Emily. "You did the right thing filing today." Emily nodded, though tears shimmered in her lashes. The judge continued, "Based on the evidence presented, threats, forgery, coercive financial behavior, and unstable conduct, I am issuing emergency protective orders effective immediately." Emily's breath hitched. Walter felt the tension leave her body in waves. Jason was still outside somewhere, stewing, pacing, plotting. But the court's authority placed a barrier between him and the daughter Walter had spent months trying to shield. "Additionally," the judge said, turning pages, "I am placing a temporary financial freeze on all accounts associated with Mr. Dawson until the investigation concludes." Walter closed his eyes in gratitude, quiet, controlled, but profound. Emily reached for his hand under the table, fingers trembling. "Thank you," she whispered to him, voice breaking. Walter squeezed gently. "We're not done yet, but we're close." For the first time in months, hope entered her eyes, fragile but real. The judge's gavel fell with a firm thud. But outside the courthouse, Jason, furious, humiliated, cornered, waited with the thin, dangerous calm of a man who had just lost everything. The real clash was still coming. And Walter knew it. Snow fell in slow, lazy spirals outside the courthouse exit, blurring the world into white as Walter walked down the steps with Emily beside him. The emergency orders were signed. The financial freeze was in place. Jason had been escorted out, still seething, still threatening. But Walter knew something Jason didn't. The real blow hadn't landed yet. They reached the parking lot just as headlights swung sharply across the asphalt. Jason's car lurched into a stop 10 feet away, tires crunching against the snow. The driver's door flew open. Jason stumbled out, rage, humiliation, and desperation mixing into something feral in his eyes. "You think you won today?" he shouted, voice cracking. "You think those stupid orders change anything? I'll get the house back. I'll rebuild everything you destroyed." Emily stiffened beside Walter, fear flickering in her expression. But Walter stepped slightly in front of her. Not to shield her bodily, but to shield her emotionally, from the storm that was about to break. "Jason," Walter said evenly, "calm down." "No," Jason barked, pacing with frantic energy. "You froze my accounts. You ruined my credit. You had cops dragging me out like a criminal, but I'll figure it out. I'll refinance somewhere else, move the debt, restructure, anything to get free of you." Walter watched him unravel, watched the panic simmer behind every word, and only then did he speak, voice quiet but sharp enough to slice through the cold air. "You won't be refinancing anything." Jason blinked, thrown. "What?" Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded set of documents, fresh, crisp, unmistakably official. He held them out, but not close enough for Jason to snatch. "These," Walter said, "are ownership transfer confirmations." Jason frowned in confusion, then snatched the top page and skimmed it. The blood drained from his face. "Collection agency transfer. Account holder, Jason Dawson. New owner of debt, Walter Reed." Jason staggered backward, as if the paper itself burned. "No, no, no, what is this?" He flipped to the next page. Another debt, then another, all now under Walter's name, all transferred legally, completely, without loopholes or escape. "What did you do?" Jason breathed, voice trembling. Walter stepped closer, not threateningly, but with the quiet authority of a man who had regained every inch of ground Jason had stolen. "I bought your debt," Walter said simply. Jason shook his head violently. This can't be legal, you can't just." "I can," Walter interrupted smoothly, "and I did." Jason's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His knees bent slightly, his balance faltering. He looked like a man watching the floor drop out from beneath him. Walter continued, voice calm, measured. "You forged my signature. You tried to drag my daughter into your financial mess. You tried to isolate her, control her, ruin her. You used her trust to build a life you couldn't afford." He let the words settle, cold and heavy. "So I used your arrogance." Jason let out a fractured exhale, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. You bought everything." "Every outstanding loan," Walter confirmed. "Every credit line, every delinquent balance. You don't owe the banks anymore." He paused. "You owe me." Jason collapsed onto the hood of his car, legs wobbling, palms pressed against the freezing metal as he tried to breathe. His composure, already frayed, shredded completely. "You can't do this," he whispered hoarsely. "You can't just control everything." Walter's expression didn't change. "I'm not controlling you, I'm containing you." Jason shook his head repeatedly, disbelief fighting panic. "You can't refinance me. You can't release me. You can block everything." "That's correct," Walter replied. "And you will." "I will," Walter said plainly. "You won't refinance. You won't move. You won't liquidate assets. Every financial door you try to open will slam shut until every debt is repaid. Jason looked up, eyes glassy, face pale. And we both know you can't repay them. Emily stood behind Walter, saying nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any accusation. She watched the man she once trusted crumble, not with triumph, not with cruelty, but with the unmistakable clarity of someone finally seeing the truth. Jason was powerless. And Walter was. Jason's lips trembled. You're doing this to destroy me. Walter shook his head slowly. I'm doing this to protect her. He glanced toward Emily, then back to Jason. You should have walked away when you had the chance. Jason's breath hitched. He looked at Emily, searching for softness, for pity, for anything he could still exploit. But Emily's eyes were steady, hurt, yes, but resolute. She saw him now. Not the man he pretended to be. The man he really was. Jason swallowed hard, voice barely audible. You win. No, Walter said, turning toward his car. This isn't about winning. This is about ending your harm. Emily followed Walter into the car, but before she closed the door, she looked back one last time. Jason stared at them, broken, stunned, hollowed out by the realization that there was one person he could not intimidate, manipulate, or overpower. Walter. And the war he thought he was winning. It had just shifted entirely out of his hands. Jason's collapse didn't happen quietly. It unfolded in public view, one humiliating piece at a time, like a man disintegrating under the weight of his own life. Walter didn't have to lift a finger now. The machinery was already in motion. Once the debt transfers settled and the financial freeze locked in place, the consequences rolled downhill fast, and Jason was standing at the bottom, unprepared, furious, and exposed. The first shock came 3 days after the courthouse confrontation. Jason walked out of his house to find a tow truck idling at the curb, hazard lights blinking in the brittle morning air. The driver held a clipboard, expression apologetic but unmoved. Repossession order, he said simply. Jason barked at him, insisting there had to be a mistake, but the driver only gestured toward the paperwork. Overdue payments, failed authorizations, newly assigned creditor permission, Walter Reed. Jason's voice cracked mid-argument. He kept glancing up and down the street, suddenly aware of the neighbors peeking through curtains, pretending not to stare. When the truck pulled away with his car, Jason stood on the sidewalk frozen, fists clenched, breath fogging the air. A man who had once walked the neighborhood with chest-puffed bravado now looked small, cornered by a world he could no longer control. The same day, his debit card declined at the gas station, then again at the pharmacy. Wallet full of frozen plastic, accounts locked from every angle. He cursed, slammed the card machine, shouted at the teenage clerk until the manager threatened to call police. People watched. They whispered. They remembered the shouting outside Walter's home. They remembered the police visit on Christmas. They remembered rumors about overdue bills, noise, broken windows, late-night fights. And now the truth spilled into public view. Jason Dawson wasn't a victim. He was a man falling apart. Detective Henderson called Walter that afternoon. Financial Crimes is ready, she said. The forged refinance attempt triggered a full review. Fraud charges may be filed soon, likely within the week. Walter didn't smile. Justice wasn't something to smile over, not when it came from someone else's suffering, but he felt a measured calm settle over him. Justice was simply the natural consequence of truth catching up. Thank you, Walter said quietly. Henderson added, your recordings, the voicemails, the financial documentation, they're airtight. If he pushes back legally, he won't get far. Walter hung up and glanced toward the living room, where Emily sat curled on the armchair, her legs tucked beneath her, watching the snowfall with a soft, distant expression. She looked tired but not fragile. Not anymore. The tension that once followed her like a shadow had thinned, lightened, as if her spirit had finally been given room to breathe again. She turned when she felt him watching. Another update. Walter nodded. Charges may come soon. Emily exhaled, not relief exactly, but something close. Good, she whispered. Maybe now he'll finally stop. But people like Jason never truly stopped. They only shifted. That evening, long after the sun dipped behind the snow-laden roofs, Emily's phone buzzed repeatedly. She groaned softly, expecting another debt collector searching for Jason. But when she looked down, her throat tightened. Jason Dawson, one voice message, 053. Walter watched her hands tremble slightly, not from fear but from fatigue. She handed the phone to him. I don't want to hear it. Walter pressed play. Jason's voice leaked through the speaker, broken, hoarse, stripped of its usual venom. Emily, please, I'm sorry, I messed everything up. I'm losing everything. I need you, I need us. Your father doesn't understand what I'm going through. I'm not a bad man. I'm just drowning. Please call me back. Don't turn your back on me. In the background of the message, Walter heard something. Glass clinking, maybe a shaky exhale. A man on the edge. Emily closed her eyes, jaw tightening. He's not apologizing for what he did. He's apologizing for what he lost. Walter didn't respond. She didn't need confirmation. Another message arrived, a text this time. I'll do better, I swear, just talk to me. Walter held her gaze, silently asking what she wanted done. Emily looked at the phone for a long moment before shaking her head. Delete it. Walter nodded. But before he pressed the button, he listened to the message one more time, not for sympathy, not or doubt, but for the final confirmation he needed. Jason wasn't sorry. He was collapsing. And collapsing men were dangerous. Walter tapped delete, the message vanishing into digital silence. Then he placed the phone on the table, his voice steady, low, almost solemn. It's unfolding now, he said, exactly as it should. Emily nodded. No tears, no shaking, just clarity. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, a reminder that storms don't come before they break. And though Jason Dawson had been broken by his own choices, Walter knew one thing. The fallout wasn't over yet. The final confrontation was still coming. For the first time in months, Emily woke up without the weight of someone else's anger waiting for her. The small guest room in Walter's house was quiet, soft morning light spilling across the quilt her mother had sewn decades ago. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't glamorous. But it was peace. And after everything, peace felt like a miracle. In the days following Jason's collapse, Emily began the slow, painful task of rebuilding a life she'd nearly lost. It started with the simplest things, getting her own phone plan, opening a bank account that belonged solely to her, canceling joint credit cards she never wanted. Every form she filled out felt like reclaiming a piece of her identity. Walter took her to look at rentals around town, letting her choose without pressure, without comment. They visited 4 places before they found it, a small, sunlit one-bedroom on a quiet street only a mile from his home. The kitchen was cramped. The living room needed paint. The floorboards creaked. But when Emily stepped into the empty space, her eyes softened. "This feels mine," she whispered. Walter nodded. "Then it's perfect." He signed nothing. He hovered over no decisions. He simply helped her carry boxes, assemble a bed, fix a leaky faucet. He gave her room to breathe, space she hadn't had in years. Emily's therapist, Dr. Marin, was the next pillar in her rebuilding. The first session left her shaking, emotions finally spilling out after years of being compressed into silence. "I don't understand how I became someone who apologized for things I never did," she admitted. "I don't know when I started shrinking." Dr. Marin listened, guiding her gently. "Control isn't always loud," she said. "Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it rewrites your understanding of yourself one small moment at a time." Emily went twice a week. Each session peeled away another layer of what Jason had carved into her, doubt, shame, dependency. And with every layer removed, she began to recognize herself again. Not the frightened wife, but the strong woman she'd been before manipulation crept in like quiet rot. One evening, Alyssa showed up at her new rental with a grocery bag in one hand and tears already in her eyes. "Thank God," she breathed as soon as Emily opened the door. "I've been praying you were safe. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. I should have said something sooner." Emily hugged her tightly, the familiarity grounding her. "You cared," she said softly. "That was enough." They sat on the couch eating cheap takeout while Alyssa listened to everything. Jason's spirals, the forged documents, the police visits, the courthouse scene. She shook her head repeatedly, horrified and relieved all at once. "I'm so glad you're out," Alyssa whispered. "I was scared he'd isolate you completely." "He almost did," Emily admitted. "But my dad, he pulled me back." That truth settled heavily in her chest as Alyssa left and night drifted in. Emily sat alone in her new home, surrounded by half-opened boxes, thinking about all the moments she'd pushed Walter away, not by choice but by fear of Jason's reaction. And then the memory of the Christmas text surfaced, sharp and painful. The next morning she visited Walter's house. He was fixing a loose hinge on a cabinet when she walked into the kitchen. "Dad," she said softly. He looked up. She wasn't crying, but her eyes glistened. "I need to say something." Walter set the screwdriver down and turned fully toward her, patient, attentive as always. "The Christmas text," she said, voice trembling. "I've carried guilt for that ever since. I know I didn't write it, but I pressed send. I let him push me into hurting you. I should have fought harder." Walter stepped closer, shaking his head gently. "Emily," he said, voice warm and steady, "those were never your words." She inhaled, a tear finally sliding free. "I still feel like I abandoned you." "You didn't abandon me," Walter replied. "You were surviving. There's a difference." Emily closed her eyes, letting the weight of that truth settle. He wasn't excusing what happened. He was understanding it. And that meant more than any apology she could offer. When she opened her eyes, she saw the faintest smile on his face, soft, proud, relieved. "Thank you," she whispered. Walter reached out and squeezed her hand. Not tightly, not protectively, just enough to tell her. He was still here, still her father, still her anchor, still her home. Their relationship didn't snap back instantly. It didn't need to. Healing came in small gestures, the way she now called him without fear, the way he didn't hover but always showed up, the way conversations felt free again, not monitored. They repaired trust one careful moment at a time. Slowly, deeply, honestly. But outside their quiet restoration, a reality lingered, unfinished, unresolved. Jason's spiral, his looming charges, the consequences still unfolding. And though Emily was rebuilding, the world around them hadn't finished shifting. The coming months would bring closure. But not yet. For now, father and daughter stood together again, steadier, stronger, and the final chapters of justice waited just ahead. Winter deepened around town in a way that felt symbolic, cold settling into every empty corner, wind scraping against shuttered windows, the world outside mirroring the desolation inside Jason Dawson's life. What had once been arrogance had drained out of him entirely. What replaced it was a hollow, gray version of a man who had built his identity on control, only to watch every piece slip from his hands. Neighbors spoke in hushed voices. They saw him wandering the sidewalk at strange hours, a hood pulled over his unshaven face. He no longer drove. His repossessed car left a bare patch on the curb. He no longer smiled, the confident swagger replaced by a slow, defeated shuffle. Bills piled at his door. Collectors no longer called because there was nothing left to collect. Isolation wrapped around him like December frost. Friends stopped reaching out. Family kept their distance. Even the people who once tolerated him retreated, having seen too much. The man who used to taunt Walter about being old-fashioned now lived like a ghost, unseen, unsteady, and unraveling. Detective Henderson worked quietly through the paperwork, the reports, the forensic signatures, the financial trails Jason thought nobody would bother following. Each detail formed a chain, link by link, that closed firmly around him. One evening, Walter received her call. "It's official," she said. "Fraud charges are confirmed. Coercion, too. The DA's office is moving forward." Walter didn't celebrate. He simply nodded, as though acknowledging something overdue finally arriving. "Thank you," he said. Henderson paused. "Emily strong enough for what comes next?" "Yes," Walter answered softly, "she is." The court date arrived on a brittle morning, frost clinging to windshields, air sharp enough to sting. Emily dressed simply, dark sweater, hair tied back, expression calm but solemn. As she walked toward the courthouse with Walter and Neil, she held her father's arm not out of fear but gratitude. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Rows of benches, oak panels, the familiar weight of institutional justice. Emily took her seat, clasping her hands in her lap. She didn't tremble, not this time. Jason entered minutes later, escorted by two officers. He looked smaller than before, swallowed by a wrinkled suit he once wore with pride. His shoulders slumped, his face pale, dark circles bruising the skin beneath his eyes. He didn't look at Emily. He didn't look at the judge. And he didn't look at Walter, not even for a second. Walter watched him quietly, his expression unreadable. There was no anger left, no leftover rage, just an honest acknowledgement of a man standing in the wreckage of his own making. The judge reviewed the charges with a slow, deliberate cadence: forgery, attempted fraud, financial coercion. Each one hit the air like a hammer. Jason's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. He didn't contest. He didn't defend himself. Whatever fight he once clung to had burned out long before he stepped into the courtroom. When invited to speak, he only muttered, "No statement," his voice barely audible. Emily watched, not with triumph, never that, but with the solemn dignity of someone witnessing the final page of a chapter she feared might never end. She wasn't here to see him punished. She wasn't here to see him broken. She was here to reclaim something she had lost the moment she'd sent Walter that forced text on Christmas Eve: her sense of self. The sentencing was procedural, clear, firm. The penalties reflected the gravity of the evidence Henderson and Neil had constructed. Fraud was not a slap-on-the-wrist crime. The judge spoke with even tone, no malice, just the weight of law. When it was over, the officers led Jason away. He walked past Emily without a glance, past Neil without a flicker, and past Walter, still refusing eye contact, as if facing the man he once tried to destroy was now more than he could bear. Walter watched him go, a slow exhale leaving his chest. No satisfaction filled him, no thrill, just an easing, like a knot finally loosening after being pulled tight for too long. Emily slid her hand into his. "You okay?" she whispered. Walter nodded. "Are you?" She took a breath, steady and full. For the first time, yes. They walked out together into the crisp winter air. Snow drifted down softly, not like the oppressive storms of the past months, but like a clean slate settling over the town. The courthouse doors closed behind them, shutting the chapter permanently. On the steps, Walter paused, looking at the world with a quiet sense of completion. Justice did not roar today. It did not arrive with headlines or applause. It arrived softly, quiet, deliberate, certain. Sometimes the loudest justice was the kind that did not need an echo. As they moved toward the parking lot, Emily squeezed his arm gently. "What happens now?" she asked. Walter looked ahead, the horizon clearing with every step. "Now," he said, "we build." The winter wasn't over, but the darkness was. And the next season would belong to healing. The snow had finally begun to melt by the time Walter felt ready to share his plan, a plan he'd been shaping quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment. Winter still clung to the edges of the streets, but patches of grass peeked through, small signs that the world was thawing. So was Emily. She'd been living in her rental for a month now. It was simple, modest, but it was hers, her coffee mugs, her blankets, her decisions. Walter visited often, always knocking, always waiting for her invitation. They shared dinners, painted old memories with new ones, talked about life in a way they hadn't in years. Healing wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like sunlight slowly melting frost. One Saturday morning, Walter picked her up without explaining much, just telling her, "Wear something comfortable. We're running an errand." Emily raised a brow but smiled. She trusted him again deeply. They drove through side streets lined with bare trees, then turned into a quiet neighborhood tucked just beyond Walter's own. He parked in front of a small, aging single-story house with peeling blue paint and a sagging porch rail. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't polished. But it had charm, the kind that waited patiently for someone to notice it. Emily looked at him, confused. "Dad, what is this place?" Walter stepped out of the car and motioned for her to follow. He walked her up the cracked walkway and stopped in front of the door. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling a key from his jacket. Emily stared as he unlocked the door and pushed it open. The interior was dusty, quiet, the kind of quiet that begged for life. Sunlight streamed through the front window, catching in the particles floating through the air. The walls were dull. The hardwood floors were scratched. The kitchen was out of date. But there was enough space for someone rebuilding, enough light for someone healing, enough potential for someone starting again. Walter turned to her, eyes gentle. "I bought it." Emily froze. "You what?" "I bought it," he repeated calmly, "for you." Her breath caught. She looked around again as if wrong about what she was seeing, then back to him. "Dad, no, I can't let you do that. I just got out of depending on someone. I can't fall into that again." Walter didn't move closer. He simply folded his hands in front of him. "This isn't dependency. This is transition." He let the words sink in. "You will own this home, not me. The deed will be in your name alone." Emily blinked, stunned. "But why? Why would you do this for me?" Walter smiled softly, a tired smile but full of love. "Because you deserve a place no one can take from you. A place that's yours. A place built on peace, not fear." She covered her mouth with her hand as tears welled, thick and sudden. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just accept it. Only for now, until you're strong enough to carry it on your own. I'll step back when you're ready." Emily let out a shaky laugh, wiping her cheek. "You always know exactly what I need before I know it." Walter shook his head. "No, I just listen." She walked across the living room slowly, her fingers brushing the wall, her footsteps soft but certain. The house wasn't perfect, but she didn't need perfect. She needed possible. And this was the first moment she allowed herself to imagine a future without fear, without debt, without Jason's shadow pressed into every corner. She turned back to Walter, tears finally spilling freely. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, I accept." Walter felt something loosen in his chest, something he'd been carrying for longer than he realized. "Good," he said quietly. "Then let's make this place shine." And during the following weeks, they did. They repainted every wall, soft greens, warm creams, gentle colors that invited calm. Walter repaired the porch rail while Emily sanded the banister. They replaced old fixtures, scrubbed years of dust from corners, opened windows and let fresh air sweep through rooms that had waited too long for inhabitants. They worked side by side, pausing only for coffee breaks and quiet conversations that stitched their relationship back together. Emily laughed again, small at first, then fuller, then freely. Walter noticed the way her shoulders sat higher now, the way she walked without glancing over her shoulder, the way she filled each room not with caution, but with life. One evening, as they finished painting the last wall, Emily stepped back and whispered, "I feel safe, Dad. Really safe." Walter nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "That's all I ever wanted." She turned to him, eyes warm. This feels like starting over. And starting right, he added. As they locked up for the night, Walter paused on the porch, looking at the soft glow inside the house. A sense of quiet triumph washed through him, not loud, not boastful, but deep and steady. He had reclaimed something stolen from them last Christmas. Their sense of family, their peace, their future. And as the porch light flickered gently in the cool night air, Walter felt something else bloom inside him. A quiet anticipation. Because Christmas was coming again soon. And this time it would be theirs. Snow drifted softly across the quiet neighborhood, blanketing rooftops in gentle white. It had been 1 full year since the Christmas that shattered everything, and 1 full year since Emily began rebuilding her life from the ground up. This Christmas was different. This Christmas was hers. Walter walked up the freshly painted steps of her little blue house, the porch glowing with warm string lights. Through the window he could see silhouettes, friends, neighbors, a few coworkers, and right in the center, Emily, laughing as she set a dish on the table. Her laughter no longer sounded cautious. It had weight again. Warmth. Freedom. When he stepped through the door, the room lit up. "Dad," Emily said, rushing over with the same excitement she had as a little girl running downstairs to the tree. She hugged him tightly, arms wrapped firmly around his shoulders. Walter held her just as tightly, feeling the fullness of a moment he'd once feared he might never get back. Inside, her home was alive with the kind of warmth Jason had tried to drain from her life. Candles flickered on the mantel. Cookies steamed on a tray. A fire crackled softly behind the screen. Laughter bubbled like rolling music between conversations. Walter looked around, taking it all in slowly. The home she'd made, the life she'd reclaimed, the circle she'd rebuilt, not from force or fear, but from choice. Emily guided him to the dining table, now set with old holiday china Walter recognized from their family attic. She had insisted he take it from storage, not for nostalgia, but because she said she wanted traditions she could trust again. Dinner was simple but perfect. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, warm rolls that tasted better because they weren't made under pressure. Walter found himself smiling without even realizing it. Every detail of this night whispered something profound. Peace had returned. After dessert, as guests drifted toward the living room and the fire painted slow-moving shadows across the walls, Emily approached Walter with a small, wrapped package. She held it carefully, as though it was delicate in ways that had nothing to do with weight. "Dad," she said softly, "before the night gets busy, I want you to open this." Walter took the gift, hands steady but breath caught somewhere deep in his chest. He peeled back the paper slowly and uncovered a simple wooden frame. Inside it, written in elegant handwriting, was a message. "My real home was always you, Dad." Walter felt the words hit him, quietly, deeply, like falling snow landing weightless yet somehow changing the entire landscape. He looked up at Emily, and for a moment neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Tears welled in her eyes. "I know I've said sorry before, and I know you forgave me long ago, but this is what I needed to tell you, that no matter where I lived, no matter what happened, you were the place I felt safest, even when I forgot it, even when he made me forget it." Walter reached out, cupping her cheek gently as he had when she was young. "Sweetheart, you never needed to apologize. You were fighting for survival." She leaned into his hand, tears slipping freely now. "But you saved me. You didn't give up on me, and you gave me the chance to start over." Walter's voice softened, cracking in places he hadn't expected. "All I ever wanted was for you to find peace, and you have." They embraced, longer than before, deeper than before. Not rebuilding this time, not repairing, but completing something that had taken a year of courage and heartbreak and healing. When they pulled apart, Emily wiped her tears with a small laugh. "I think Mom would be proud of us," she whispered. Walter smiled. "I think so too." As the evening settled and the fire glowed brighter, the scene inside Emily's home felt like the closing of a wound, warm, steady, whole. But beyond that warmth, far across town, another scene played out. Jason Dawson sat alone on a thin mattress in a halfway house, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Dinner had been bland and forgettable, conversation non-existent. No visitors, no calls, no family. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the institutional clock on the wall, the ticking too loud in the silence. He thought of Emily's laughter. He thought of Walter's calm strength. He thought of the life he tried to dominate, now gone forever. And in the hollow spaces of his regret, one truth cut deeper than any sentence the court had handed him. Walter Reed was never embarrassing. He was unbreakable. Jason lowered his head into his hands, and for the first time the reality settled in, fully, painfully. He had lost everything because he had underestimated the one man who refused to bow. Back in Emily's warm home, Walter sat beside her on the couch near the fire. She handed him a mug of hot cider, their hands brushing briefly. They clinked mugs together gently. "To new beginnings," she whispered. "To family restored," Walter answered. Outside, snow drifted softly like blessing. Inside, father and daughter sat in the glow of a life reclaimed. Stronger, safer, and finally complete. A Christmas neither of them would ever forget.